The music was too loud and the crowd too dense. But John Wayne's voice cut through both when he said the words that would change everything between him and Clint Eastwood forever. It was March 1973 at the Beverly Hills Hotel, during one of those industry gatherings where legends mingled with rising stars, where deals were made over cocktails, and where egos collided in conversations that shaped careers. Wayne was holding court near the bar, surrounded by his usual circle of admirers and longtime friends from the studio system's golden age. At 66, he remained the undisputed king of westerns, the man who had defined what it meant to be a cowboy on screen for over 4 decades. His presence filled any room he entered, and tonight was no exception. Across the room, 43, old Clint Eastwood stood quietly with a small group, nursing a beer and listening more than talking. The spaghetti westerns had made him an international star. Dirty Harry had proven his range, and Hollywood was finally taking notice. But to the old guard, he was still the television actor who had gotten lucky in Italy, the quiet guy with the squint who made unconventional westerns that broke all the rules. The confrontation began innocuously. Someone mentioned the success of Clint's recent films, how the new generation of westerns was finding audiences that the traditional ones were losing. Wayne's expression darkened slightly, though he kept his voice conversational. Different times, Wayne said, swirling his whiskey. Different audiences, they want anti-heroes now instead of real heroes. They want complicated instead of clear. Makes you wonder what we're teaching people about right and wrong. The comment wasn't directed at anyone specifically, but everyone in both groups heard it. The room seemed to grow quieter around them, as if people sensed something building. Clint glanced over at Wayne but said nothing, his face revealing no reaction to the indirect criticism. But Wayne wasn't finished, perhaps emboldened by his audience, perhaps frustrated by the changing landscape of Hollywood, perhaps simply being himself. He decided to make his point more directly. "Take that spaghetti western fellow over there," Wayne said, loud enough to carry across the space between them. He didn't point, didn't look directly at Clint, but everyone knew exactly who he meant. "Makes movies where the hero's just as bad as the villain. Where is the moral compass? Where is the example for young people?" Clint set down his beer and walked over. The crowd parted slightly, sensing drama, but hoping for civility. This was, after all, a gathering of professionals. These were men who had worked in the same industry, who understood the unwritten rules of public discourse. "Evening, Duke," Clint said quietly, using Wayne's nickname with respect. Wayne turned to face him, and for a moment the two men stood eye to eye, representing different eras, different philosophies, different approaches to the same craft. "Evening," Wayne replied, his voice neutral, but his eyes measuring. "Just having a conversation about the direction of Western films, the direction of heroes in general." "I heard," Clint said simply. The room grew even quieter. Waiters slowed their movements. Conversations at nearby tables died down. Everyone was suddenly very interested in whatever was happening between these two men. Wayne studied Clint for a long moment, then spoke with the confidence of a man who had never been seriously challenged in his own domain. "See, here is what I don't understand about your movie, son. The man with no name, they call him, but a real cowboy, a real hero. He's got a name. He's got principles. He stands for something clear and simple that folks can understand." "Maybe," Clint replied, his voice carrying that same quiet intensity that had made his screen persona so compelling. "Or maybe the world's more complicated than that now." Wayne's jaw tightened slightly. This wasn't the deference he was used to receiving from younger actors. This wasn't the respect he felt he deserved from someone whose career had been built on westerns. His westerns, the genre he had created and defined. "Complicated," Wayne repeated, as if the word tasted bad. "That is the problem right there. A hero's supposed to make things simple. He is supposed to show people the right way. Your characters, they're not heroes. They're just killers who happen to be the main character." The criticism hung in the air between them. Several people shifted uncomfortably. This had moved beyond professional disagreement into personal attack territory. Clint's friends looked ready to step in, but he remained calm, his expression unchanged. "And what makes a real hero, Duke?" Clint asked. His voice still quiet, but with an edge that made people lean in to hear better. Wayne straightened to his full height, every inch the movie star, every gesture calculated for maximum impact. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had never doubted his own position in Hollywood's hierarchy. A real hero stands for justice, clear justice. He protects the innocent and punishes the guilty. He doesn't question whether he is doing right, because he knows he is doing right. He has got honor, integrity, and the courage to back both up. Most importantly, he is someone kids can look up to, someone who shows them how a man ought to behave. Wayne paused, looking directly at Clint now, making sure his next words hit their target cleanly. A real hero is a real cowboy, and you, son, you are not a real cowboy. You are just an actor who got lucky playing dress up in Italy. The room went completely silent. This had crossed every line of professional courtesy, of respect between peers, of simple human decency. Wayne had just dismissed Clint's entire career, his legitimacy as both an actor and as someone worthy of carrying on the Western tradition. Clint stood there for several seconds, letting Wayne's words settle, letting the crowd absorb what had just happened. His face showed no anger, no hurt, no embarrassment. If anything, he looked almost curious, as if Wayne had just revealed something interesting about himself, rather than delivered an insult. When Clint finally spoke, his voice was so quiet that people around the edges of the circle had to strain to hear him. "You know, Duke, you are right about one thing. I am not a real cowboy, never claimed to be." He paused, glancing around at the faces watching them. "But then again, neither are you." Wayne's face flushed. This was not how this conversation was supposed to go. The younger man was supposed to be intimidated, apologetic, perhaps defensive. He wasn't supposed to turn the challenge around. "I've been making westerns since before you were born, son," Wayne said, his voice rising slightly. "I've shown more people what it means to be a cowboy than anyone alive. I am the cowboy. On screen," Clint said simply. "You are the movie cowboy, the fantasy cowboy. The cowboy that never existed except in scripts and on sound stages." The distinction was subtle but devastating. With a few quiet words, Clint had separated Wayne's screen persona from any claim to authentic cowboy identity, had reduced his iconic status to mere performance. Wayne's hands clenched slightly. People around them held their breath. This was John Wayne, the man who had never backed down from anyone, who had built his reputation on strength and masculine authority. "And what makes you think you know anything about real cowboys?" Wayne demanded. Clint's response came without hesitation, delivered in that same quiet tone that somehow carried more weight than shouting. "Because I've worked with them, rode with them, learned from them. Before I was making movies in Italy, I was digging swimming pools in Oakland. Before that, I was in the army. Before that, I spent summers on my grandfather's ranch in Carmel Valley, working cattle, fixing fences, doing the things real cowboys do when cameras aren't rolling." He paused, letting that sink in, then continued. "The real cowboys I've known didn't talk much about honor and justice. They just did their work, took care of their animals, helped their neighbors when needed, and minded their own business. They didn't need to announce what they stood for because their actions showed it. They didn't need to be heroes because they were just trying to be decent men." Wayne's face had grown redder with each word. He was being lectured about authenticity by someone he considered a pretender, being told that his life's work was somehow less real than manual labor and ranch work. "So you think digging pools and fixing fences makes you more authentic than 40 years of showing people what courage looks like?" Wayne shot back. "I think," Clint said, his voice growing even quieter, forcing everyone to lean closer, "that courage isn't something you show people. It is something you have when nobody's watching. When there is no script, no director, no audience. When it is just you and a choice between doing right and doing easy." The room was absolutely still now. This had moved beyond professional disagreement, beyond generational conflict, beyond even personal insult. This had become a philosophical confrontation about authenticity, about what made a man worthy of respect, about the difference between performance and character. Wayne looked around the room, perhaps expecting support from his longtime friends and colleagues, but the faces looking back at him showed something he wasn't used to seeing: uncertainty. People were thinking about what Clint had said, measuring it against Wayne's responses, and not automatically siding with the established legend. Easy to talk about real courage when you are making millions playing killers in Italian westerns, Wayne said. But there was less fire in his voice now, as if he sensed the room slipping away from him. Clint nodded thoughtfully, as if considering Wayne's point seriously. You are right again, Duke. It is easy to talk about courage when you are successful and secure, just like it is easy to talk about what makes a real cowboy when you've never actually been one. The hard part is proving it when someone challenges you, when someone questions whether you've earned the respect you think you deserve. Wayne stared at him, finally understanding that he had walked into something he wasn't prepared for. He had expected to embarrass a younger actor in front of Hollywood's elite. Instead, he was being systematically dismantled by someone who had spent the entire conversation speaking more quietly while somehow dominating it completely. "What are you saying?" Wayne asked, his voice tight. "I am saying that maybe the difference between us isn't that you are a real cowboy and I am not. Maybe the difference is that you need people to believe you are, and I don't need people to believe anything about me. My work speaks for itself. Your work should too, without you having to tear down someone else's to make it look better." Clint picked up his beer from where he had set it down, took a small sip, and looked at Wayne with something that wasn't quite pity but was definitely not respect. "A real cowboy doesn't need to tell people he is a real cowboy, Duke. He just is." Then he walked away, leaving Wayne standing in the middle of the circle, surrounded by people who were suddenly very interested in their drinks, in the decor, in anything except the man who had just been quietly devastated in front of them. The party continued, but the dynamic had shifted permanently. People talked in hushed tones about what they had just witnessed. John Wayne, the king of westerns, the ultimate screen cowboy, had picked a fight with Clint Eastwood and lost it without a single voice being raised, without a single dramatic gesture, without anything that would look like a conventional confrontation. Wayne left early that night. He didn't speak to Clint again, didn't acknowledge him, didn't attempt to recover from what had happened. He simply finished his drink and departed, taking with him something that had been damaged beyond repair. The story spread through Hollywood within days. Not because people gossiped maliciously, but because what had happened was so unusual, so perfectly representative of a changing industry, that it became impossible not to discuss. The old guard was giving way to something new, and that transition had been crystallized in one conversation at a Beverly Hills party. Wayne continued making movies for several more years, but something had changed. His authority, which had seemed unquestionable, now felt fragile. His pronouncements about films and actors were received with less automatic deference. He had revealed something about himself that night, something that suggested his strength might have been more performance than substance. Clint's career, meanwhile, entered its most successful phase. He began directing, producing, choosing projects that reflected his own sensibility rather than anyone else's expectations. The quiet authority he had displayed that night in Beverly Hills became his trademark both on and off screen. Years later, after Wayne's death, Clint was asked about their confrontation. His response was characteristically brief. Duke was a great movie star who created something important in American culture. But he made the mistake of thinking his screen persona was more real than it was. When you start believing your own publicity, you stop growing as an artist and as a person. But those who were there that night tell a more complete story. They talk about the moment when Hollywood's future faced its past, when quiet confidence overcame loud authority, when authenticity triumphed over performance. They remember it as the night Clint Eastwood proved he was indeed a real cowboy by showing John Wayne that being one had nothing to do with movies and everything to do with character. The legacy of that confrontation wasn't anger or bitterness, but clarity. It established that respect in Hollywood, like respect anywhere else, had to be earned through actions rather than demanded through reputation, and it demonstrated that sometimes the most devastating response to aggression isn't aggression in return, but simply the quiet truth delivered without malice or drama. In the end, Wayne had been right about one thing. Clint Eastwood wasn't a real cowboy. He was something rarer and more valuable. A real man who happened to play cowboys convincingly because he understood what authenticity actually meant.